Sometimes the people willing to risk everything for your child are the ones you never saw coming. I never believed one ordinary decision could split my life into a before and an after, but that rainy Thursday evening proved me wrong. The school parking lot had emptied nearly 20 minutes earlier, leaving only my aging blue Honda and the soft glow of security lights reflecting across puddles. My shoulders ached from carrying stacks of student artwork, and my mind was already drifting toward leftover lasagna waiting in my refrigerator. I remember thinking how peaceful the night felt. That illusion shattered when a series of sharp popping sounds echoed somewhere beyond the next block. At first, I convinced myself they were fireworks. Then I noticed people running. Not jogging. Running with the kind of fear that spreads faster than words. Car doors slammed. Tires squealed. Someone shouted for everyone to get inside. My heart began pounding before I even understood why. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers, but another sound stopped me. It wasn't screaming. It wasn't another loud crack. It was the smallest voice I'd ever heard. Please. I turned toward the narrow alley beside the old brick church. A little girl, no older than 7, stood frozen beside an overflowing dumpster, her pale blonde hair damp from the rain, her blue sweater streaked with dirt. Her wide green eyes searched every corner of the street like she expected danger to appear at any second. She wasn't crying. Somehow that frightened me even more. Children who were truly terrified often ran out of tears. She took one hesitant step toward me before whispering, "Don't let them find me." Every sensible instinct told me to leave, to call 911 from a safe distance, to stay out of something I couldn't possibly understand. But another instinct spoke louder. The one that had made me become a teacher. The one that believed no child should ever face fear alone. I hurried toward her, knelt until we were eye level, and gently wrapped my raincoat around her shoulders. "You're safe with me," I whispered, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. She looked over my shoulder instead of at my face. "They're still looking." I followed her gaze. Across the intersection, black SUVs rolled slowly through the rain with headlights cutting across the empty street. I had no idea who they were. All I knew was that the little girl beside me flinched every time another engine echoed nearby. Without thinking twice, I took her small hand into mine. It felt impossibly cold. We slipped through the church's side entrance, which someone had forgotten to lock after the evening food pantry closed. Inside, the sanctuary stood silent except for rain tapping against stained glass windows. Candlelight flickered near the altar, casting soft reflections across polished wooden pews. The girl refused to let go of my hand. "Do you know your parents' phone number?" I asked quietly. She shook her head. "My daddy will find me." There was absolute certainty in her tiny voice, the kind only children possess. I smiled gently. "Then we'll wait somewhere no one can see us until he does." She nodded once. I led her downstairs into the church basement, where folding chairs, canned food, and donated blankets lined the walls. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old books. I wrapped another blanket around her shoulders and found a small box of crayons beside a Sunday school cabinet. "Would you like to draw while we wait?" She stared at the crayons for several long seconds before choosing a green one. Instead of drawing flowers or houses, she sketched 3 stick figures holding hands beneath an enormous oak tree. One was very tall. One was very small. The third was missing. Before I could ask about it, footsteps echoed somewhere above us. Slow, heavy, deliberate. The little girl instantly grabbed my sleeve, her breathing quickening as she whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "Please, don't tell them I'm here." The footsteps above us stopped so suddenly that even the rain seemed to hold its breath. I instinctively pulled Lily closer behind a stack of folding tables, my hand resting gently on her shoulder. Her tiny fingers wrapped around my sleeve with surprising strength. She did not say another word. She only listened. So did I. A door somewhere upstairs opened with a long creak, before closing again. Then came voices, low and impossible to understand through the old wooden floor. Whoever they were, there was more than one of them. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I reached into my purse and unlocked my phone, careful to dim the screen before dialing 911. There was no signal. The basement walls were too thick. I swallowed my frustration and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Lily looked up at me with eyes far older than any 7-year-old should have had. "Daddy always finds me," she whispered again. I know he does. I forced a reassuring smile. Then we will give him every chance to do exactly that. She nodded, although I could see fear trying to replace her confidence. To distract her, I picked up another crayon and began drawing beside her on the back of an old church newsletter. I sketched a tiny schoolhouse with a swing set and a big sun overhead. She stared at it for a moment before adding another figure beside the child she had already drawn. This one had long hair. She looked at me without speaking, then quietly colored the second figure's sweater blue, the same color as the raincoat I had wrapped around her shoulders. Something tightened inside my chest. She had only known me for a few minutes, yet somehow I had already become part of the picture she imagined as safe. More footsteps echoed above us. This time they moved faster. Doors opened, closed. Someone called out a name that I could not make out. Lily's breathing became shallow. I leaned close enough that only she could hear me. Can you tell me your last name? She hesitated. Then she slowly shook her head. Daddy says not to tell strangers. Under any other circumstance I might have laughed. Instead I whispered, that is actually a very smart rule. For the first time since I found her, the corners of her mouth lifted into the smallest smile. Then headlights swept through the narrow basement windows near the ceiling. One pair. Then another. More engines rolled to a stop outside the church. They did not sound like police cruisers. They sounded quieter. More organized. Lily suddenly sat upright. Every trace of fear vanished from her face. She tilted her head as though recognizing something I could not hear. He is here, she breathed. Before I could ask what she meant, every engine outside went silent at exactly the same moment. No slamming doors. No shouting. Just silence. The kind of silence that only existed when everyone was waiting for one person to make the next move. I slowly stood, shielding Lily behind me as footsteps approached the basement staircase. They were measured, calm, unhurried. Whoever was coming down those stairs was not running because they already expected everyone else to wait for them. The old wooden door opened, and a tall silhouette filled the frame. The dim emergency light behind him outlined broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored black overcoat. Rainwater glistened across polished dress shoes as he paused without taking another step. His face remained hidden in the shadows, but the quiet authority surrounding him reached us long before his voice did. Lily, he said softly, it is time to come home. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I stepped in front of Lily, spreading one arm across her as naturally as if I had known her my entire life. The man at the bottom of the stairs did not advance. He simply stood there, rainwater dripping quietly from the edge of his coat onto the old wooden floor. Behind him, several other men waited in complete silence. None of them spoke. None of them reached for the little girl. Their attention remained fixed on the tall stranger, as though every decision belonged to him alone. She stays behind me until I know who you are, I said, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. His eyes found mine through the dim light. They were a striking shade of green, almost identical to Lily's, yet colder, carrying the weight of countless sleepless nights. He studied me without interruption, as though trying to understand why a complete stranger would place herself between him and his daughter. Lily tugged gently on the back of my sweater. Miss Claire, she whispered. That is my daddy. I did not move. Children could be mistaken. Fear could make anyone say anything. Then he can prove it, I answered softly without taking my eyes off the man. One of the men behind him shifted his weight, but the stranger lifted a single finger. The movement was almost invisible, yet everyone behind him became perfectly still again. Authority surrounded him without effort. What do you need? He asked calmly. There was no anger in his voice, only patience. I looked down at Lily. Sweetheart, if he really is your father, tell me something only he would know. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of the oversized raincoat I had given her. He always reads one chapter before bed, she said. Even when he comes home very late. He changes the voices for every character, because he says dragons should never sound like pirates. For the first time, the man's expression softened. It was almost impossible to notice, but the hard lines around his eyes eased for a single heartbeat. Treasure Island, he said quietly. You insisted Long John Silver needed a better pirate voice. Lily smiled for the first time that evening. You finally practiced it. I slowly lowered my arm, though I stayed close enough to reach her if she needed me. The little girl stepped forward only 2 small steps before stopping again. The man immediately crossed the remaining distance, lowering himself onto one knee so they were eye level. He did not pull her into an embrace. He simply opened his arms and waited. Lily rushed into them without hesitation. I let out a breath I had apparently been holding for the last 20 minutes. Relief flooded through me so suddenly that my knees felt weak. The stranger closed his eyes briefly as he held his daughter, as though the entire world had narrowed to that single moment. When he finally stood, Lily remained tucked safely against his side. He looked back at me. My name is Vincent Moretti, he said. Thank you for protecting my daughter. The name meant nothing to me, but judging from the way every man behind him straightened at its sound, it clearly meant something to everyone else. I offered a tired smile. I only did what anyone should do. An older man standing near the staircase quietly lowered his eyes, almost as though he disagreed. Vincent continued watching me with an expression I could not quite read. Respect, perhaps? Or disbelief? No, he replied after a long silence. Very few people would have. The tension in the church basement slowly gave way to something quieter. I watched Lily hold her father's hand as though she had finally reached solid ground after drifting through a storm. Vincent never loosened his grip, yet there was nothing possessive about it. It was the touch of a parent making certain his child was truly safe. One of the men approached carrying a clean umbrella and a neatly folded wool blanket. Vincent thanked him with a small nod before draping the blanket around Lily's shoulders himself. She leaned against him, already looking far less frightened than when I had first found her in the alley. I gathered my purse from the folding chair and brushed a layer of dust from my jeans. My entire body suddenly felt exhausted, as though the adrenaline that had carried me through the evening had quietly disappeared. Vincent noticed before I said a word. Miss Bennett, he said in the same calm voice, our family physician is waiting nearby. I would appreciate it if you allowed her to make sure you are all right. I smiled politely and shook my head. I am fine. I just need to go home. His expression remained composed. Please. You helped my daughter without asking who she was. Allow me to return at least a small part of that kindness. Before I could answer, Lily looked up at me with hopeful eyes. Please come with us. I do not want to say goodbye yet. That simple request made refusing much harder than I expected. 20 minutes later, I found myself sitting inside one of the black sport utility vehicles as rain streaked across the windows. The ride was almost silent. Lily had fallen asleep with her head resting against her father's shoulder, while Vincent looked out the window without speaking. City lights reflected across the glass, briefly illuminating the colorful tattoos that disappeared beneath the open collar of his white dress shirt before fading back into darkness. He looked nothing like the fathers I knew from parent-teacher conferences, yet every few seconds his eyes drifted back to Lily just to make certain she was still comfortable. We eventually arrived at a quiet estate tucked behind tall iron gates and old maple trees. The house was elegant without feeling extravagant, its warm lights glowing against the rainy night. Inside, a physician carefully examined a few small scratches on my hands that I had barely noticed until then. Nothing serious, she said with a reassuring smile. You have simply had a very long evening. A member of the household placed a cup of hot tea in front of me along with a fresh towel. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, grateful for something ordinary after such an extraordinary night. A few minutes later, Vincent returned carrying a simple envelope. He placed it gently on the table between us. This cannot repay what you did, he said, but I hope you will accept it as my gratitude. I looked at the envelope without opening it. I already knew what it contained. I slowly pushed it back toward him. I did not help Lily because I expected anything in return. He studied me for a long moment. Most people would have accepted it. I smiled softly. Most teachers spend their days reminding children that kindness is not something you sell. For the first time that evening, the faintest hint of a genuine smile appeared on Vincent's face. It disappeared almost as quickly as it came, but I noticed it all the same. So did Lily, who had quietly walked into the room and whispered with sleepy certainty, Daddy, I told you she is different. The following morning felt almost unreal, as though I had dreamed the entire night before. My alarm rang at 6:30, and for a few peaceful seconds I was simply Claire Bennett again. A second-grade teacher worried about lesson plans and unfinished grading. Then I noticed the faint scratches across my hands as I reached for my coffee mug, and every memory returned at once. I arrived at school just before 7:30. The familiar scent of dry erase markers and freshly waxed hallways settled my nerves more than I expected. Children hurried through the entrance wearing oversized backpacks, parents waved goodbye, and the ordinary rhythm of the morning reminded me that life could still feel wonderfully predictable. I decided not to tell anyone what had happened. Even if I tried, I doubted anyone would believe me. During recess, my principal stepped into my classroom with a puzzled expression. "Claire," she said quietly, "there is someone here asking for you." I assumed it was a parent arriving early for a conference. Instead, I found a neatly dressed older gentleman waiting near the front office, holding a small white envelope. He smiled politely. "Miss Bennett, my name is Arthur. I work for Mr. Vincent Moretti." Hearing that name again immediately brought back the image of Lily running into her father's arms beneath the church basement lights. Arthur extended the envelope toward me. "Mr. Moretti asked me to deliver this personally." I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a handwritten note in careful script. It read, "Thank you for giving my daughter comfort when fear surrounded her." There was no check, no expensive gift, no promise of favors. Only those simple words. Beneath the note rested a child's drawing folded neatly in half. I recognized it immediately. Lily had finished the picture she started in the church basement. 3 figures stood beneath the same enormous oak tree. This time every figure had a smile. On the back, written in uneven green crayon, were the words, "Thank you, Miss Claire." I felt my throat tighten. Arthur noticed my expression and quietly said, "She insisted that you should have it." I smiled and carefully placed the drawing back inside the envelope. "Please tell Lily that I will treasure it." Arthur nodded. "There is one more thing. Mr. Moretti wishes to respect your decision yesterday. He understands why you declined any reward. He only asked that you allow us to know you arrived safely at school today." I looked at him with genuine surprise. "He wanted to know that?" "Yes," Arthur replied. "He believes kindness deserves kindness." Before leaving, he handed the school receptionist a small basket of fresh muffins for the faculty lounge, with no business card and no signature attached. It was such an ordinary gesture that it somehow meant more than an extravagant one would have. As I watched Arthur walk back toward a black sport utility vehicle waiting across the street, I noticed he glanced carefully in both directions before getting inside. Perhaps it was habit. Perhaps it was caution. I told myself not to overthink it and returned to my classroom, where 20 excited children immediately surrounded me with stories about their pets, their homework, and their favorite breakfast cereal. I smiled through every conversation, yet somewhere in the back of my mind I could not shake the feeling that my quiet life and Vincent Moretti's complicated world had not crossed paths for the last time. For nearly a week, life settled into something that almost resembled normal again. My students filled the classroom with questions about butterflies, spelling tests, and whether turtles could recognize their owners. I laughed more than I expected to. Every time I glanced at the folded drawing Lily had given me, tucked safely inside the top drawer of my desk, I smiled without realizing it. I kept telling myself that extraordinary moments belonged in the past. Then little things began happening that I could not explain. One rainy afternoon, my old Honda refused to start after work. Before I could even search for a towing company, a roadside assistance truck pulled into the parking lot. The driver smiled as though he had been expecting me. "Miss Bennett?" he asked. "We received a call saying you might need help." I frowned. "I never called anyone." He looked genuinely confused before checking his clipboard again. "Well, someone certainly did." Within 15 minutes my battery had been replaced, and when I asked who was paying for it, the driver simply shrugged. "Already taken care of." 2 days later, I left a neighborhood grocery store balancing several heavy bags. An elderly woman accidentally dropped her cane near the entrance, and as I bent to help her, I noticed a black sport utility vehicle parked across the street. It looked familiar. The windows were tinted, and it drove away the moment I looked in its direction. I tried convincing myself that I was imagining things. Still, I could not ignore the growing feeling that someone was quietly making sure I arrived home safely. The answer came the following Friday evening. Stayed late decorating my classroom for the upcoming science fair. The building was almost empty when I finally walked outside carrying a box of supplies. A cold breeze swept through the parking lot, scattering loose papers across the pavement. As I chased them, another gust nearly knocked the box from my arms. Before it could fall, someone caught it. I looked up and found Vincent standing only a few feet away. He wore a charcoal overcoat over a white dress shirt with the top button undone. The colorful edges of the tattoos along his collarbone briefly appeared before disappearing beneath the fabric again. "You have excellent timing," I said with a nervous laugh. "I have been told that before," he replied. His expression softened slightly as he handed the box back to me. "I hope you do not mind that I stopped by." "Should I?" I asked. He looked toward the quiet street before answering. "Probably not. But I owe you honesty." We began walking slowly toward my car. The evening air smelled of fresh rain and blooming dogwood trees. "The night you found Lily," he said quietly, "there were people searching the neighborhood for reasons I still do not completely understand. I do not believe you are in immediate danger, but I would rather be careful than regret being careless." I stopped walking. "The roadside assistance. The vehicle I keep seeing." He nodded once. "Only to make certain you were safe. Nothing more." I should have been upset that someone had been watching over me without asking. Instead, I remembered Lily's frightened voice in the church basement and the relief on Vincent's face when he found her. "Next time," I said gently, "you could simply tell me." A faint smile appeared. "I am still learning that ordinary people solve problems differently than I do." I could not help smiling back. "Then perhaps we both have something to teach each other." For the first time since we met, the distance between our worlds no longer felt impossible. It simply felt unfamiliar. The following Tuesday began like any other. My classroom buzzed with laughter as my students proudly showed off their science fair projects. And for a few hours I almost forgot how unusual the past week had been. After school, I stayed behind to clean glitter from the art tables and organize construction paper that somehow found its way into every corner of the room. By the time I switched off the classroom lights, the hallway had already fallen quiet. Outside, the sky glowed with the deep orange colors of early evening. I walked toward the parking lot carrying my canvas tote over one shoulder and my lesson planner under my arm. Halfway across the lot, I noticed a little boy standing near the front gate. He looked no older than 6, clutching a stuffed bear almost as big as his backpack. There were no adults nearby. I slowed my pace and smiled gently. "Are you waiting for someone?" He nodded uncertainly. "My grandma is running late." I stayed with him beneath the entrance awning until an elderly woman hurried across the sidewalk, apologizing repeatedly for the delay. As they left together, I caught sight of a familiar black sport utility vehicle parked across the street. This time the driver did not leave when I looked over. Instead, the headlights flashed once before the vehicle quietly pulled away. I sighed to myself. Vincent had clearly meant what he said about being careful. My phone rang just as I reached my car. It was an unfamiliar number. "Miss Bennett?" a cheerful little voice asked. I immediately recognized it. "Lily." She giggled. "Daddy said I could call because I wanted to tell you something." I smiled before I even realized I was smiling. "I am listening." "I got an A on my spelling test." "That is wonderful. I knew you could do it." There was a brief pause before another voice came on the line. "I hope she is not interrupting your evening." Vincent sounded almost hesitant, which surprised me more than anything else. "Not at all," I replied. "She made my day." He was quiet for a moment. "She has been asking about you every evening." I have been wondering how she was doing too. Before either of us could say anything else, a loud clap of thunder rolled across the sky. Rain began falling in thick drops, sending people hurrying toward their cars. "You should drive before the weather gets worse," Vincent said. "Please let me know when you are home." I laughed softly. "You are still trying to make sure I arrive safely." "Yes," he admitted without embarrassment. "Some habits are difficult to abandon." I promised I would text once I arrived, and we ended the call. During the drive home, I realized something had changed. A week earlier, Vincent Moretti had been nothing more than a stranger whose name meant nothing to me. Now his daughter called to share good news, and his concern no longer felt like an intrusion, felt sincere. As I parked outside my apartment, I sent a brief message that read, "Home safely." A reply appeared less than 10 seconds later. "Thank you. Rest well, Claire." I stared at those 3 simple words longer than I probably should have, unaware that somewhere beyond the glow of the streetlights, events already unfolding would soon test the fragile trust we had only just begun to build. 3 days passed without anything unusual happening, and I slowly allowed myself to believe that the strange chapter of my life was finally settling into something ordinary. Then Saturday morning arrived with an unexpected invitation. My phone buzzed while I was watering the flowers on my apartment balcony. The message came from Vincent. "Lily is volunteering at a neighborhood book drive today. She has asked 3 times whether you might come. Only if you are comfortable." I read the message twice before smiling to myself. It did not feel like an obligation. It felt like a child sincerely hoping to see someone she trusted. An hour later, I pulled into the parking lot of a small community center where families were carrying boxes of donated books through the front doors. Lily spotted me before anyone else did. She ran across the sidewalk and wrapped her arms around my waist with the effortless joy that only children possess. "I knew you would come," she announced proudly. Vincent followed at a slower pace, dressed far more casually than I had ever seen him before. Dark jeans replaced tailored slacks, and a light sweater covered the colorful tattoos that I knew rested beneath. He looked less like an intimidating businessman and more like a father enjoying a quiet Saturday with his daughter. Together we spent the afternoon sorting children's novels, stacking picture books, and helping young readers choose stories to take home. Lily insisted on recommending every book she had ever enjoyed, often inventing enthusiastic summaries that had very little to do with the actual plots. Watching her laugh so freely, it became difficult to imagine the frightened little girl I had found outside the church only weeks earlier. Late in the afternoon, while Lily helped another volunteer decorate bookmarks, Vincent and I stepped outside carrying empty cardboard boxes to the recycling container. A cool breeze drifted through the trees, carrying the scent of fresh grass after an overnight rain. "She has been sleeping through the night again," he said quietly. "The nightmares have almost disappeared." I leaned against the side of the container and smiled. Children are stronger than we sometimes realize. They simply need to know they are not facing the world alone. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking again. "You have changed more than her life." I met his eyes without saying anything. "You reminded me that not everyone who enters my world wants something from me," he continued. "Some people simply choose kindness because it is who they are." His words settled over the quiet afternoon with surprising weight. Before I could answer, Lily burst through the front doors waving 3 handmade bookmarks in the air. "Family picture," she announced. She handed her phone to another volunteer and hurried between us, taking one of my hands and one of her father's. We laughed as the volunteer counted to 3. Just before the camera captured the moment, Lily squeezed both our hands and whispered, "Now it looks right." I did not realize until later that evening, while looking at the photo she insisted on sending me, that none of us appeared uncomfortable or uncertain. We simply looked happy. Yet as I admired the picture, another message arrived from Vincent. It contained only one sentence. "There are still things about my life you do not know, and when the time is right, I want to tell you everything." Almost a year passed before I truly understood how completely one evening had changed my life. The seasons quietly turned. My classroom filled with new students, Lily grew taller, and Saturday mornings became our unspoken tradition. Sometimes we visited the community library. Sometimes we walked through the botanical gardens. Sometimes we simply shared sandwiches on a park bench while Lily talked endlessly about school, books, and the puppy she still hoped her father would eventually allow her to have. Vincent remained the calm center of every moment. Around strangers he carried the same quiet confidence I had noticed the first night we met, yet with Lily he laughed more easily than he probably realized. Around me he no longer felt like someone from another world. He simply felt like the man who always remembered how I took my coffee, and who never forgot to ask about my students before speaking about his own day. One warm afternoon, the elementary school invited families to an open house celebrating community volunteers. Lily insisted that her father attend with her. As children proudly introduced parents and relatives to their classrooms, I noticed Vincent standing near the doorway watching Lily admire the artwork hanging from the walls. "She belongs here," he said softly. "She has always belonged here," I replied. "She only needed the chance to believe it." He looked at me for a long moment before reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket. Instead of an expensive gift, he removed the faded drawing Lily had made in the church basement nearly a year earlier. The paper had been carefully protected inside a clear sleeve. "She asked me to carry this today," he said. I smiled as I recognized the 3 stick figures beneath the giant oak tree. She told me she wanted to compare it with the new one. At that exact moment, Lily ran toward us carrying fresh construction paper covered in bright crayons. "Look," she announced proudly. "I made another family picture." I looked down. 3 figures stood beneath an even larger tree. This time each person had a name written above them. Daddy, Claire, Lily. My eyes filled before I could stop them. I knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, are you sure?" She nodded with complete confidence. "Family is who makes you feel safe." I had spent my career teaching children that words mattered, yet I could not find any of my own. Vincent quietly extended his hand, helping me back to my feet. We stood there in the middle of the bustling hallway while students laughed, parents talked, and teachers greeted one another. The world continued moving around us, but for one peaceful moment everything felt perfectly still. "Claire," he said gently, "the night you found Lily, you protected her before you knew her name, before you knew mine, and before you had any reason to trust either of us. I have spent every day since then trying to understand why." I smiled through grateful tears. "Because no child should ever have to face fear alone." He nodded slowly. "That answer is exactly why I hoped you would stay in our lives." He lifted my hand and held it carefully, giving me every chance to step away if I wished. I did not. Instead, I stepped closer. Our first kiss was quiet, brief, and filled with the kind of certainty that needed no audience. When we pulled apart, Lily clapped her hands with delighted approval, making both of us laugh. Looking back now, I realized the greatest gift that evening outside the church ever gave me was not an extraordinary story. It was something far simpler. I learned that family is not always created by blood or circumstance. Sometimes it begins with one ordinary act of kindness, offered without expecting anything in return, and grows into a place where every heart finally feels at home.